One of the things that made me optimistic was the story you relayed of you and John McCain. Here, a Democrat and a Republican, a prisoner of war and a war protester, yet you forged a special relationship to opponents. Could you share that with us? And
Sure. It's a wonderful story, to be honest with you. It's an affirming story because it's really about our country. It's about how democracy and bipartisanship should work. And I devote a whole chapter to the part about John McCain and our joint quest to deal with Vietnam. But look, obviously, folks, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to know that John McCain, son of an admiral, grandson of an admiral, graduate of Annapolis, went into the Navy as a sense of duty and responsibility, and went to Vietnam and was shot down in 1967. And he spent 5.5 years as a prisoner of war in Hanoi in a prison camp. I, son of an Army Air Corps pilot, and a mother who worked in France as a nurse and escaped the Germans right in front of them the day before they came into Paris, and I write about it, and whose house that she lived in France was taken over by the Germans and then bombed and burned when they left it at the end of the war. And I went into the service along with friends of mine at university because I believed in sense of duty. I believed that people who were given a lot owed a lot. You have to serve. And so I volunteered in 1965, raised my hand a year before I graduated even, and decided to go in and volunteered to go to Vietnam. So John and I came to service from the same place, but we had different experiences. And my experience was in the rivers of the Mekong and a gunboat, and his experience was in the air and he shot down. So I get to the Senate in 1984. I'm elected during the Reagan landslide. Reagan carried Massachusetts. And John McCain was in the House, and he came to the Senate, I think, 2 years later or so. We are flying together as members of a delegation to go to Kuwait the day after it was liberated, Desert Storm. And we're sitting, by seniority, we're assigned facing each other in an airplane for hours. And you sit there and think, well, okay, maybe we should talk. So I reached out and said, asked him questions about Annapolis and about service and being a prisoner of war. And he asked me questions about the war I'd experienced and why I'd protested and what I thought. And you know what happened, folks? That conversation brought two people from a different place, the POW and the protester, to say, we should work together. Because we knew that in America, the war had not been pacified. People were still angry. Frankly, some of that anger you saw come out in 2004. I mean, people were still carrying a sense of, whoa, So John and I made a commitment not just to work to make peace with Vietnam and deal with the issue of POW MIA. We felt a mutual obligation to get the answers to the question of whether or not Americans were left behind in Vietnam. And you remember Rambo, so that's Sly Stallone and the movies and the tiger cages. There was a belief system here. A lot of people thought, wow, maybe some guys were left behind. So before you could do anything with Vietnam or anything here at home, you really have to get the answers to that, right? So John and I buckled down and worked together to make peace at home as well as abroad. And it was one of the great things we both did in the Senate. I went to visit John a couple months, 6 weeks before he died. And we laughed about it, we chatted about it a little bit, and we both realized how proud we were of what that committee did, of what we were able to do. Because we went back to Vietnam. I went back 20 times, 25 times. I met with the leaders of Vietnam. I said, guys, we have to go into your hamlets. We have to go into prisons unannounced. We have to be able to talk to your generals, talk to your jailers. We have to be able to chase every bit of evidence because we've got to help those families get answers as to what happened to their loved ones. And so I thought, I thought I'd share. Can I read? I'll share a passage with you folks, which describes in the end, I mean, I can't tell you how hard it was to do this. And at the very end, I had to go to the president of Vietnam, the chairman of the Communist Party, and the prime minister, And I have to say to them, one of our senators is convinced that some Americans may be held under the tomb of Ho Chi Minh. And Mr. President, you need to allow me and that senator to go down under the tomb and look and make certain there's nobody there. I saw him, literally almost turn literally white and look at me, you what? And so I talked to them, I said, look guys, this may seem improbable to you, but it adds to the conspiracy theory and it adds to the doubts. And if you say no, it will make it even stronger, the belief that, and then all our work is for naught. So they okayed it, and Senator Bob Smith of New Hampshire and I flew back to Vietnam, and at 4 o'clock in the morning, so nobody could see us, they took us down into the under part of the thing, and Bob was opening doors and shutting doors and walking into corridors, literally looking for whether an American or any trace of the Americans were left alive. And I was transfixed underneath, looking at these machines that were all pumping formaldehyde through Ho upstairs, where he was lying in perpetual state. And I thought, how improbable is this scene, folks, for a guy who was here fighting? It's just ridiculous. But here's what John McCain and I were proud of. Page 200 in the book. No country in history, in all of warfare, has ever done as much to implement an exhaustive accounting of all the missing and captured in a war. The American people can be proud of what our teams accomplished and continue to accomplish in this endeavor. Most Americans are simply unaware that even today, we have American military personnel who continue to search in Vietnam. We still dig up the crash sites of a C-130 or Phantom jet. We still climb to remote mountaintops and excavate the earth in a rice paddy or village. On one visit to Vietnam, I was taken out to a lush green field near a small farm. There, a complex scaffold of wood had been built leading down a ramp into the excavated area of a downed C-130 that had crashed and never been recovered. I walked into the area and had an eerie feeling that I was literally walking into the crew's resting place, their grave. God had buried them in the very place they had died, but we were finally going to bring them home. I wondered about the circumstances of their loss, whether they were killed before impact or whether there was time for terror or panic as they plummeted to earth. Had anyone survived for a while? Did the plane hit with such an impact that it drove itself 20 feet below the surface we were walking on? Inside the excavation, the troops working painstakingly to sift the earth and scrape away time, explaining to me how they managed their own emotions and performed the difficult task of recovering the fragments of what was once a vibrant, determined team of young Americans at war. I was amazed by the meticulous archaeology methodology of finding scraps of clothing, a tooth, a fragment of a bone, and then undertaking the extraordinary forensic investigation in our labs in Hawaii to make positive identification. This enormous commitment to keep faith with American military values has produced a remarkable record. The remains of more than 700 service members brought home to still mourning families who all deserved answers. This work was one of those rare chances you get in public life to actually bring people something they'd waited for more than 2 decades: peace. The peace that comes with closure. But for me and for John McCain, that wasn't the only reward. In our new friendship and in the work we did, we were ending the war about the war. If a protester and a prisoner of war can find common ground on the most divisive of issues, finding common ground on almost anything else didn't seem so hard after all. That's why I'm an optimist, folks. We can do this.